The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Redemption Creek, Colorado, startling Nathaniel Douglas as she stood at her husband's grave, the dirt still fresh beneath her worn boots. The year was 1876, and at 23 years old, she had already become something most women dreaded: a widow in a frontier town where survival without a man was nearly impossible. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then driving, turning the cemetery's dirt into mud that clung to the hem of her black mourning dress. With no umbrella and no one waiting for her return, Nathaniel stood there, letting the rain wash away her tears. Thomas Douglas had been a gentleman, not cut out for the harshness of frontier life. The fever had taken him quickly, leaving Nathaniel with nothing but debts and whispers following her through town. "Best be heading back before you catch your death too, Mrs. Douglas," said the gravedigger, an elderly man who had seen too many young wives burying their husbands. "What difference would it make?" Nathaniel whispered, but she turned anyway, making her way down the muddy path toward town. Redemption Creek had once seemed full of promise when they'd arrived from Boston 2 years earlier. Thomas had dreams of starting a small newspaper, bringing civilization to the frontier, one printed word at a time. Now the printing press sat silent in the small storefront that had been their business and home, the bank threatening to seize it any day. The main street was mostly deserted as the rain continued to fall. Nathaniel walked with her head down, ignoring the stares from the windows of the general store and saloon. She knew what they were thinking: another burden on the town, another mouth that couldn't feed itself. Widows without family were worse than useless in a place like this. They were troublesome reminders of how quickly fortune could turn. At the edge of town, a commotion drew her attention. A small crowd had gathered outside Griffin's saloon, where 2 men were engaged in a heated argument. One was Horace Griffin himself, the saloon owner who had been pressuring Thomas to sell their building for months. The other was a stranger, his clothes travel-worn, his face weathered by sun and wind. "You've got no business here, drifter," Griffin was saying, his voice carrying through the rain. "We don't need another saddle tramp taking up space and drinking water." The stranger stood his ground, though Nathaniel could see he was swaying slightly. His boots were worn through, and his clothes hung on his frame, suggesting he hadn't had a proper meal in days. "I earn my drink fair," the man replied, his voice steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "And I'll be moving on once the rain lets up." Griffin spat on the ground. "You've got nothing left to pay with. That coin you gave me was your last, wasn't it? I can spot a desperate man a mile away." The stranger said nothing, confirming Griffin's suspicion. "Get on out of town before sundown," Griffin continued. "We've got enough troubles without adding to them." As the crowd began to disperse, Nathaniel noticed Griffin pointing in her direction, whispering something that made the men laugh. The familiar shame burned in her cheeks as she quickened her pace toward the print shop. Just as she reached the door, a voice called out behind her. "Madam?" She turned to find the stranger standing there, hat in hand, despite the rain. Up close she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. His eyes were a clear blue, contrasting with his sun-darkened skin. "I don't mean to trouble you," he said, "but they mentioned you might have a stable out back of your shop. I was wondering if I might take shelter there until the storm passes. I won't be any bother." Nathaniel hesitated. Letting a strange man stay on her property, even in the stable, would only feed the town gossip. But there was something in his eyes, not desperation exactly, but a quiet dignity that reminded her of Thomas. "What's your name?" she asked. "Killian Rawlins, madam. I've been working my way north from Texas." "You're a long way from Texas, Mr. Rawlins." "Yes, madam, that I am." Nathaniel looked at him more carefully. His gun belt was worn but well maintained, and though his clothes were dirty, they'd been mended with careful stitches. Not a careless man, then. "The stable isn't much," she said finally, "but it's dry. You can stay until morning." Relief washed over his face. "I'm much obliged, Mrs. Douglas? Nathaniel Douglas?" A flicker of surprise crossed his features at her unusual name, but he only nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Mrs. Douglas." As they walked around to the back of the building, Nathaniel found herself explaining, "My father wanted a son. When I arrived instead, he gave me the name he'd chosen anyway, said it would make me strong." "Did it?" Killian asked. The question caught her off guard. "I'm still here," she answered after a moment. Though some days that's about all I can claim. The stable was small, with room for only 2 horses, though it now stood empty. Thomas had sold their mare months ago when his illness first began to drain their savings. There was clean straw in one corner and a small tack room that stayed reasonably warm. "You can sleep in there," Nathaniel said, pointing to the tack room. "There's a lantern on the hook and matches on the shelf." Killian nodded, surveying the space. "This is more than generous, Mrs. Douglas. I won't forget it." An awkward silence fell between them. Nathaniel wasn't sure what else to say. It had been months since she'd had a proper conversation with anyone besides Thomas. "I heard what Griffin said," Killian spoke finally. "About the coin." Nathaniel looked away. "It's not my business." "No, but it's true enough. I gave him my last coin for a whiskey and some information." A rueful smile crossed his face. "The whiskey was watered down, and the information wasn't worth much. Seems fitting." "Information about what?" "Work. I was told there might be ranches around here hiring. I've been a cowhand most of my life." Nathaniel shook her head. "The biggest spread is the Simmons place, about 10 miles west. But they laid off hands last month. Times are hard everywhere. So I've found—" Killian ran a hand through his damp hair. "Might I ask what business you're in? I noticed the printing press through the window." "My husband's business," Nathaniel corrected. "He published a weekly newspaper, the Redemption Creek Chronicle." "Published?" Killian caught her use of the past tense. "He died 3 days ago." The words felt strange in her mouth, as if saying them aloud made Thomas's absence more real. Killian removed his hat again, holding it against his chest. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Douglas." "Thank you." Nathaniel turned to go, suddenly needing to escape the sympathy in his eyes. "There's a pump in the yard if you need water. Good night, Mr. Rawlins." "Good night, Mrs. Douglas." Nathaniel returned to the print shop, closing and locking the door behind her. The familiar smell of ink and paper greeted her, along with the crushing silence that had replaced Thomas's cheerful voice. She lit a lamp and moved through the front room, where the printing press stood idle, past the small counter where customers had once placed orders for advertisements and announcements. Behind a curtain was their living space, a modest room with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small cook stove. Everything was exactly as it had been when Thomas had taken his last breath in that bed, his hand clutching hers as fever consumed him. Nathaniel changed out of her wet clothes and into her nightgown, then sat at the table with Thomas's ledger open before her. The numbers told a grim story. They had been behind on the bank loan for months. Without Thomas to run the press, there would be no income. The bank would foreclose within weeks. A soft knock at the back door startled her. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders and went to answer it, finding Killian standing there, hat still in hand. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said quickly, "but I noticed the woodpile by the stable is nearly gone, and with this rain, I thought you might need some chopped before morning." Nathaniel was taken aback. That's thoughtful, but unnecessary. It's the least I can do for your kindness." His eyes were earnest. "I may not have money, Mrs. Douglas, but I'm not one to take charity without giving something in return." Pride made her want to refuse, but practicality won out. The woodpile was indeed low, and chopping wood was a task she'd been dreading. "Very well," she said. "There's an axe in the stable, but please, don't feel obligated." Killian nodded. "I'll have it done before sunrise. You won't be disturbed." True to his word, Nathaniel awoke the next morning to find a neatly stacked pile of chopped wood by the back door, enough to last her at least 2 weeks. Killian himself was nowhere to be seen, though his saddlebags remained in the tack room, suggesting he hadn't left town yet. She dressed and made herself a simple breakfast of cornbread left over from the day before. As she ate, she heard voices outside, angry voices. Moving to the window, she saw Sheriff Taylor standing in the street with Killian. "Griffin says you threatened him," the sheriff was saying. "I did no such thing," Killian replied calmly. "I merely asked if he knew of any work to be had." "Well, he wants you gone, and frankly, so do most folks. We don't need drifters bringing trouble." "I'm not looking for trouble, Sheriff, just honest work." The sheriff eyed him skeptically. "You've got until noon to be on your way, or I'll run you in for vagrancy." As the sheriff walked away, Nathaniel saw Killian's shoulders slump slightly. Without thinking, she opened the front door and called out to him. "Mr. Rawlins." He turned, surprise evident on his face. "I could use some help today," she said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "if you're looking for work." Killian crossed the street to her door, his expression guarded. "That's very kind, Mrs. Douglas, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," she replied firmly. "The press needs cleaning and there are deliveries to be made. My husband, I need to sort out his affairs." It wasn't entirely a lie. There was work to be done, though none of it urgent or requiring assistance. Killian studied her face, clearly understanding her true motives. "If you're sure," he said finally. "I am. Come inside." Throughout the morning, Nathaniel showed Killian the basics of the printing press, though they didn't actually operate it. He proved to be a quick study, asking intelligent questions and handling the delicate parts with care. By midday, they had cleaned the machine thoroughly and organized the type blocks. "Have you ever considered continuing the newspaper?" Killian asked, as they sat at the small table, sharing a lunch of beans and the last of the cornbread. Nathaniel shook her head. "I can't operate the press properly. Thomas tried to teach me, but I never had the knack for it. Besides, the town barely supported it when he was alive. Now—" She trailed off, staring into her cup of water. "Now they've written you off," Killian finished for her. There was no judgment in his voice, just understanding. "Pretty much. A widow without family is just a problem waiting to happen." "What will you do?" Nathaniel sighed. "Sell what I can. The press should fetch a decent price if I can find a buyer. Maybe enough to get me back east to my cousin in Philadelphia." "Is that what you want? To go back?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. "I don't know," she admitted. "This was Thomas's dream, not mine. But I've been here 2 years now. It's become home in its own way." Killian nodded, his eyes taking in the small living space with its few personal touches, a quilt on the bed, a small shelf of books, a dried flower arrangement on the windowsill. "What about you?" Nathaniel asked, suddenly curious. "Why are you drifting north from Texas?" A shadow crossed Killian's face. "Running from some things, looking for others." He set down his spoon. "I worked a ranch near Austin for 6 years. It was a good life, steady work. Then the owner died, and his son took over, changed everything, cut wages, worked us like dogs. When men complained, they were fired or worse." "Worse?" Killian's jaw tightened. "The new boss had a temper, a bad one. I saw him beat a man half to death for questioning an order. When I stepped in to stop it, I became the next target. I left that night." "You just walked away from your life?" "Some things aren't worth staying for, Mrs. Douglas. And sometimes staying is more dangerous than leaving." The afternoon passed quickly as they continued to sort through the shop. Nathaniel found herself talking more than she had in months, telling Killian about her life in Boston, how she'd met Thomas at a literary society meeting, how his dreams of the West had seemed so romantic and full of possibility. "He wasn't built for frontier life," she said softly as she folded one of Thomas's shirts. "Too gentle, too trusting. But he loved it here. Loved the idea of helping a town find its identity through words." "That takes a special kind of vision," Killian replied. "Most men come west looking for gold or land or escape. Your husband came to build something." "Yes," Nathaniel smiled sadly. "That was Thomas." By evening, they had made significant progress in organizing the shop. Nathaniel felt a strange sense of accomplishment, mixed with guilt. It felt disloyal somehow, to be making these changes without Thomas, to be planning a future that didn't include him. "I should check on my horse," Killian said as the sun began to set, "and perhaps see about finding some dinner." "Your horse?" Nathaniel asked, surprised. "At the livery. I couldn't ask you to stable her too. It took the last of my credit with the liveryman." Nathaniel hesitated, then made a decision. "Have dinner with me," she said. "I have stew from yesterday, and it's the least I can do for your help today." Killian looked like he might refuse, but then nodded. "Thank you. I'll just check on Daisy and be back shortly." While he was gone, Nathaniel stirred the stew and added water to stretch it further. She also changed from her work dress into a cleaner one, though not her good dress. That would have felt too much like something she wasn't ready to name. When Killian returned, they ate at the small table, the lamp casting a warm glow over the simple meal. For the first time since Thomas fell ill, Nathaniel found herself enjoying a conversation. Killian told stories of his days on the Texas ranch, of cattle drives and storms that appeared from nowhere, of nights spent under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "What made you become a cowboy?" she asked as they finished eating. Killian smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "My father was a teacher in St. Louis. He had my whole life planned out: school, university, a profession. But I couldn't sit still long enough to learn my letters properly. When I was 16, I ran away with a cattle drive passing through. Never looked back. Do you regret it? Not the choice, no. But I regret not writing to my parents. By the time I was ready to make amends, they were both gone." He looked down at his empty plate. "That's a hard lesson to learn." "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said softly. Killian nodded his thanks, then changed the subject. "What will you do tomorrow? With the shop, I mean." "I need to take inventory of everything, see what can be sold. The bank won't wait much longer." "I could help again if you'd allow it." Nathaniel studied him. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "Sometimes a stranger's kindness is the most valuable," he replied. "I've been on the receiving end enough times to know that." After dinner, Killian insisted on washing the dishes before returning to the stable for the night. As Nathaniel prepared for bed, she found herself listening for sounds from the stable, oddly comforted by the knowledge that someone was nearby. The next morning, a knock at the front door woke her. Sheriff Taylor stood there, his expression grim. "Mrs. Douglas, I understand you've hired that drifter," he said without preamble. "Mr. Rawlins is helping me sort through my husband's affairs," Nathaniel replied, keeping her voice steady. "Is there a problem?" "The problem is that he's got no references, no history in these parts. Griffin says he's trouble." "Mr. Griffin doesn't know him any better than I do," Nathaniel pointed out. "And so far, he's been nothing but respectful and hard-working." The sheriff frowned. "It doesn't look right, a widow taking in a strange man." Anger flared in Nathaniel's chest. "I haven't taken him in. He's sleeping in my stable and working for his keep. Would you prefer I let the business fall apart completely and become a burden on the town?" The question hit its mark. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Just be careful, Mrs. Douglas. This town values propriety." "This town turned its back on my husband when he got sick," Nathaniel said quietly. "Forgive me if I don't put much stock in its judgment." After the sheriff left, Nathaniel found Killian already at work in the shop, sorting through stacks of paper. "The sheriff paid me a visit," she said. Killian straightened. "I heard. I'm sorry to be causing you trouble." "You're not the one causing trouble," Nathaniel replied. "But perhaps we should be more careful. Work in the back today, away from the windows." They spent the day cataloging supplies and organizing the storage room. Nathaniel found herself laughing at Killian's dry observations about small-town life, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them. By late afternoon, they had made significant progress. "There's something I've been wondering," Killian said as they took a break. "Why did your husband name the paper The Chronicle? Most frontier papers have names like Pioneer or Sentinel." Nathaniel smiled at the memory. Thomas said a chronicle was a record of ordinary lives, not just the big events. He wanted to document the everyday stories of people building a community. He thought those were the ones worth preserving. "He sounds like a good man." He was. Nathaniel felt the familiar pang of loss, but it was gentler now, softened somehow by the sharing of memories. As evening approached, Nathaniel realized they had worked through lunch without noticing. "We should eat," she said. "I have eggs we can fry up." While she prepared the simple meal, Killian sat at the table examining one of the last issues of the Chronicle that Thomas had printed. "Your husband wrote well," he commented. "Clear, thoughtful. No wonder people respected him." "Some did," Nathaniel agreed. Others thought he was too soft on certain issues. He refused to take sides in town disputes, said a newspaper should present facts, not opinions. A rare position these days. They ate together, the conversation turning to practical matters: what items might fetch the best prices, who might be interested in buying the press. Neither mentioned what would happen after the business was sold, after Nathaniel left for Philadelphia, after Killian moved on to wherever his journey would take him. The next morning, Killian was gone when Nathaniel awoke. His saddlebags no longer sat in the corner of the tack room, and the stable had been swept clean. A note was pinned to the back door. "Mrs. Douglas, I've gone to check on work at the Simmons Ranch. Thank you for your kindness. If there is work to be had, I'll return to help you finish with the shop. If not, please know that your generosity will not be forgotten. Respectfully, K.R." Nathaniel told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was simply hunger, not disappointment. She had known Killian would move on eventually. Drifters always did. She spent the morning trying to work on the inventory alone, but found herself distracted, looking up at every sound from the street. By midday, she gave up and decided to visit the bank, to learn exactly how much time she had before they foreclosed. The walk to the bank took her past Griffin's saloon. As she approached, Horace Griffin himself stepped out onto the boardwalk, blocking her path. "Mrs. Douglas," he said, his voice oily with false sympathy. "I've been meaning to speak with you about your situation." Nathaniel steeled herself. "What situation would that be, Mr. Griffin?" "Your unfortunate widowhood, of course, and the matter of your husband's debts." He smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "I understand the bank is preparing to foreclose." "My business with the bank is private, Mr. Griffin." Of course. But as a concerned citizen, I'd like to offer my assistance. I'm still interested in purchasing your building. The offer I made to your husband stands." Nathaniel knew the offer half the property's actual value, with the understanding that Thomas would stay on as a tenant to continue the newspaper. It had been insulting then. It was even more so now. "I'll consider all offers once I've spoken with the bank," she said stiffly, attempting to step around him. Griffin moved to block her again. "Don't be hasty, Mrs. Douglas. A woman alone has limited options in a town like this. My offer might be the only one you receive. Then I'll take my chances elsewhere." Griffin's expression hardened. "That drifter you've taken in won't help you. Men like that don't stay. They take what they want and move on." "Mr. Rawlins is simply doing odd jobs for me until I sort out my affairs," Nathaniel said, fighting to keep her voice level. "And I would appreciate it if you would stop spreading gossip about matters that don't concern you." "Everything in this town concerns me," Griffin replied, his voice dropping, "including widows who forget their place." Before Nathaniel could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Mrs. Douglas!" Killian was riding toward them, mounted on a dappled gray mare. He looked different somehow. His clothes and face were clean, his posture straighter. As he drew closer, Nathaniel saw he was wearing a new shirt and vest. "Mr. Rawlins," she said, relief washing through her. "You've returned." Killian dismounted smoothly, tipping his hat to her before acknowledging Griffin with a cool nod. "Mr. Griffin?" Griffin's expression soured. "Thought you'd moved on, Cowboy?" "Appears not," Killian replied easily. Then, turning to Nathaniel, "Mrs. Douglas, I have good news. Mr. Simmons has hired me as his new foreman. His previous man left for California last week." Nathaniel blinked in surprise. "Foreman? That's wonderful news." "Indeed it is," Killian agreed, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Mr. Simmons was quite impressed when I mentioned I'd been helping organize the Chronicle. Said any man who could make sense of printer's type must have a good head for details." Griffin snorted. "Simmons is getting soft in his old age if he's hiring drifters for foremen." "Perhaps he simply recognizes quality when he sees it," Nathaniel found herself saying, surprised by her own boldness. Killian offered her his arm. "I believe you were headed somewhere, Mrs. Douglas. May I accompany you?" Grateful for the rescue, Nathaniel placed her hand on his arm. "Thank you, Mr. Rawlins. I was just going to the bank." As they walked away from Griffin, Nathaniel felt the saloon owner's eyes burning into her back, but she kept her head high. "Foreman?" she asked quietly once they were out of earshot. "Is that true?" Killian nodded. "Surprised me as much as anyone. Turns out Simmons knew my previous employer in Texas. Said any man who'd stand up to that tyrant was worth taking a chance on. That's remarkable luck." "Maybe not just luck," Killian replied. "Maybe mentioning I'd been helping a certain newspaper widow got his attention. Seems your husband made quite an impression on Simmons. Wrote a fair article about him when others were calling him a land grabber. They reached the bank and Nathaniel hesitated. "I should do this alone," she said, "but thank you for the escort." "I'll wait," Killian offered, "if that's all right." Nathaniel nodded, strangely comforted by the thought. Inside, the bank manager, Mr. Pearson, delivered the news she'd been expecting. Unless she could pay at least half the outstanding loan by the end of the month, just 2 weeks away, the bank would foreclose and auction the property. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Douglas," Pearson said, not sounding sorry at all. "But business is business." Nathaniel left the bank feeling numb. The amount needed was far more than she could hope to raise by selling supplies alone. She would need a buyer for the press itself, and quickly. Killian was waiting outside as promised, holding Daisy's reins. One look at Nathaniel's face told him everything. "Bad news?" he asked gently. 2 weeks, she replied. "That's all the time I have." They walked back toward the print shop in silence, Daisy trailing behind them. When they reached the door, Killian finally spoke. "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Douglas." Nathaniel looked up at him, wary. "What kind of proposition?" "A business one," he said quickly. "The foreman's position comes with housing a small cabin on the ranch property, and a decent wage. I'm happy for you, Mr. Rawlins, but I don't see—" "I'd like to rent a room from you," he continued, "here, above the shop. Just until you decide what to do with the property. The cabin won't be ready for a few weeks, and it would save me staying at the hotel." Nathaniel stared at him. "You want to rent a room? From me?" "Yes, I can pay 2 weeks in advance." Mr. Simmons was quite generous with a starting bonus. "The town would talk," Nathaniel said, though the idea of having company and income was tempting. "The town already talks," Killian pointed out. "And this way, everything would be proper, a simple business arrangement between a landlady and her tenant." It made sense, Nathaniel had to admit. The shop had a small room upstairs that Thomas had used as an office. It could easily serve as a bedroom, and the advance rent would buy her time to find a buyer for the press. "All right," she said finally, "but we'll need to draw up a proper agreement. Thomas had a lodger before we were married. He should have a rental contract somewhere in his papers." Killian smiled, and Nathaniel was struck by how it transformed his face, erasing the hard lines that life had carved there. "Thank you, Mrs. Douglas. I promise you won't regret it." Over the next few days, they fell into an unexpected routine. Killian would rise early and ride out to the Simmons ranch, returning in the late afternoon to help Nathaniel with the shop. They would eat dinner together, talking about their respective days, before retiring to their separate rooms. Word of Killian's new position as Simmons' foreman spread quickly through town, changing people's attitudes toward him. Shopkeepers who had eyed him suspiciously now greeted him warmly. Even Sheriff Taylor nodded respectfully when they passed on the street. Nathaniel found herself both amused and irritated by the transformation. "You haven't changed," she remarked one evening as they ate. "But suddenly you're respectable because Simmons vouched for you." Killian shrugged. "People need categories: drifter, foreman, widow. It's easier than seeing the person." "And what category have they put us in now?" Nathaniel asked, immediately regretting the question. Killian met her eyes. "Does it matter?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Nathaniel looked away first. "I suppose not," she said softly, "as long as we know the truth." But what was the truth? Nathaniel wasn't sure anymore. The grief for Thomas was still there, a dull ache that flared occasionally into sharp pain. But alongside it was something new, a warmth that spread through her whenever Killian entered a room, a lightness she hadn't felt in months. One afternoon, a week after Killian had moved in, Nathaniel was sorting through Thomas's desk when she came across a bundle of letters tied with string. They were from Thomas's sister in Ohio, whom Nathaniel had never met. The most recent was dated just 2 weeks before Thomas's death. As she read through it, Nathaniel's hands began to shake. The letter mentioned money, a substantial sum that Thomas's sister had sent to help with his medical expenses. Money that Nathaniel had never seen or heard about. She was still sitting there, the letter in her hand, when Killian returned from the ranch. "Nathaniel," he called, using her first name as he had begun to do in private. "Are you here?" "In the office," she replied, her voice strange even to her own ears. Killian appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" What's happened?" Wordlessly, Nathaniel handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his frown deepening. "Thomas never mentioned this money," she said when he looked up. "I never saw it. Where could it have gone?" Killian sat down across from her. "When did he receive this letter?" "According to the date, about 3 weeks before he died. He was already bedridden by then, but still lucid most days." Nathaniel rubbed her temples. "I don't understand. We needed that money desperately. Why wouldn't he tell me? Did anyone else handle your mail or your finances?" Nathaniel thought for a moment. "The doctor came daily, and Reverend Porter visited often. Sometimes they would bring the mail if they'd stopped at the post office." A thought struck her. "And Griffin? He started coming by regularly, pressing Thomas about selling the building. Sometimes he'd bring food or medicine." Killian's expression hardened. "Griffin, the same man who's been so eager to buy this place at half its value." "You think he took it?" Nathaniel asked, the possibility both shocking and sickeningly plausible. "I think it's worth looking into," Killian replied carefully. "How was the money sent? Does the letter say?" Nathaniel scanned the pages again. "Bank draft. His sister says she enclosed it with the letter. Then there should be a record at the bank. If someone cashed it, they would have had to sign for it." The next morning, Nathaniel went to the bank again, this time with a specific question about the draft from Ohio. Mr. Pearson was reluctant to discuss it until Nathaniel produced the letter as evidence. "Yes, the draft was cashed," he confirmed after checking the records. "About 3 weeks ago, signed for by your husband." "May I see the signature?" Nathaniel asked. Pearson hesitated, then turned the ledger toward her. The signature was indeed Thomas's name, but Nathaniel knew immediately it wasn't his handwriting. Thomas had elegant, flowing penmanship from years of writing. This signature was a crude imitation. "That's not my husband's handwriting," she said firmly. "Someone forged his name." Pearson looked alarmed. "Mrs. Douglas, that's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. I have examples of his signature if you need proof." By the time she left the bank, Pearson had agreed to investigate the matter. Nathaniel walked back to the print shop with a mixture of anger and vindication churning inside her. If she could prove the money had been stolen, perhaps the bank would extend her deadline. Killian was waiting for her, having taken the morning off from the ranch. When she told him what had happened, his expression grew grim. "We need to find out who cashed that draft," he said. "And I have a pretty good idea who to ask first." That afternoon, they rode together to the doctor's house on the edge of town. Dr. Marshall was surprised to see them, but invited them in politely. "Mrs. Douglas, Mr. Rawlins, what can I do for you?" Nathaniel explained about the discovered letter and the forged signature. The doctor listened carefully, his expression growing troubled. "I never saw any bank draft," he said when she finished. "Though I do recall Thomas mentioning he was expecting help from his sister. I assumed it never arrived." "Did anyone else visit regularly during those last weeks?" Killian asked. "Reverend Porter, of course, and Horace Griffin seemed quite concerned about Thomas's condition. Came by almost daily toward the end." Nathaniel and Killian exchanged glances. "Thank you, Doctor," Nathaniel said. "You've been very helpful." Their next stop was the Reverend's house, but he was away visiting a parishioner. Rather than wait, they decided to confront Griffin directly. Griffin's saloon was busy when they arrived, the afternoon crowd already well into their cups. Griffin himself was behind the bar, his eyebrows rising in surprise when he saw them enter. "Mrs. Douglas," he called out, "this is no place for a lady. Perhaps we could speak privately if you have business with me." "I think here is fine," Nathaniel replied, her voice carrying across the room. Conversation stopped as patrons turned to watch. "I want to ask you about the bank draft my husband received from his sister, the one you stole." A hush fell over the saloon. Griffin's face darkened. "That's slander, Mrs. Douglas. I suggest you leave before you say something you'll regret." Killian stepped forward. "The bank confirms the draft was cashed with a forged signature. Dr. Marshall confirms you were visiting daily during that time. And now you're pushing to buy the property at half its value, knowing the bank is about to foreclose." Griffin's eyes darted around the room, taking in the now attentive audience. "This is ridiculous. I've been trying to help Mrs. Douglas, offering to buy her property so she doesn't lose everything." "After stealing the money that would have saved it," Nathaniel said coldly. "The money that might have paid for treatments that could have saved my husband's life." Griffin slammed his hand on the bar. "You have no proof of anything. Now get out of my establishment before I have you thrown out." "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "there may be proof after all." Sheriff Taylor stood there, holding a ledger. "Mr. Pearson asked me to look into this matter. Seems the bank teller who processed the draft remembers it clearly. Says a man cashed it, claiming to be running an errand for Thomas Douglas. A man who matched your description, Horace." Griffin's face went pale. That's a lie." "We'll see," the sheriff replied. "The teller's coming down to make an identification. In the meantime, I think you and I should have a conversation at my office." As Griffin was led away, protesting loudly, the saloon erupted in murmurs. Nathaniel stood frozen, overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events. Killian gently touched her elbow. "Let's get you home," he said quietly. Back at the print shop, Nathaniel sat at the table while Killian made tea. She felt numb, the reality of Griffin's betrayal still sinking in. "If the money is recovered," Killian said, setting a cup before her, "you could pay the bank what's owed. Keep the shop." Nathaniel wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I don't know if I want to anymore," she admitted. "Without Thomas, the newspaper doesn't have a purpose. He was the heart of it." "What do you want, Nathaniel?" Killian asked softly. "If you could choose anything." It was a question she hadn't allowed herself to consider. What did she want? Not just what was practical or expected, but what would make her happy. "I want to stay in Redemption Creek," she said slowly, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "This has become home. But I need to find my own purpose here, not just continue Thomas's." Killian nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You could sell the press, but keep the building. Use the space for something else." The idea took root immediately. "A bookshop," Nathaniel said, the vision forming as she spoke, "with a reading room. Thomas always said the town needed more books, more education. I could order titles from back east, maybe even start a lending library." Killian smiled. "I think Thomas would approve of that." "Yes," Nathaniel agreed, feeling a weight lift from her heart. "I think he would." The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Griffin was charged with theft and forgery after the bank teller positively identified him. The stolen money was recovered from his safe, and with the sheriff's intervention, the bank agreed to accept it as payment against the loan, giving Nathaniel time to arrange her affairs. Word spread quickly through town about Griffin's deception. Many people who had avoided Nathaniel after Thomas's death now stopped by the shop to express their sympathy and support. Some even brought small gifts, baked goods, preserves, offers of help. "It's strange," Nathaniel remarked to Killian one evening as they sat on the small porch behind the shop, watching the sunset. "A week ago, I was the pitiful widow no one wanted to acknowledge. Now I'm receiving callers like a society matron." Killian chuckled. "People respect strength." "You stood up to Griffin when most would have backed down." "I couldn't have done it without you," Nathaniel said honestly. "You believed me when there was no reason to." "I had every reason to," Killian replied, his eyes meeting hers. "I've known you less than 2 weeks, Nathaniel, but in that time, I've seen your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. Believing in you was the easiest thing I've ever done." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might lean in, might close the small distance between them on the bench. But instead, he looked away, back toward the sunset. "I should turn in early," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Long day at the ranch tomorrow." Nathaniel nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that washed through her. "Of course. Good night, Killian." "Good night, Nathaniel." As she prepared for bed that night, Nathaniel found herself thinking about Thomas, about the love they had shared, gentle and comfortable like a well-worn quilt, about the plans they had made together, now forever unfinished, and about the strange, unexpected feelings that had begun to grow for Killian, feelings that were nothing like what she had felt for Thomas, but no less real. Was it disloyal to feel this way so soon after Thomas's death? Or would he have wanted her to find happiness again, to build a new life from the ashes of their shared dreams? She had no answers, only questions that followed her into restless sleep. The next morning, Killian left before dawn as usual. Nathaniel spent the day finalizing her plans for the bookshop, making lists of suppliers to contact and calculating costs. By mid-afternoon, she had a clear vision of what she wanted to create. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't hear the door open, didn't realize anyone had entered until a shadow fell across her papers. "Mrs. Douglas," said a familiar voice. Nathaniel looked up to find Reverend Porter standing there, his expression solemn. "Reverend," she greeted him, rising from her chair, "what can I do for you?" "I've come to speak with you about a matter of some delicacy," he said, removing his hat. "May I sit?" Nathaniel gestured to the chair across from her, a sense of unease growing in her stomach. "I understand Mr. Rawlins has been staying here," the Reverend began without preamble. "As a lodger." "That's correct," Nathaniel replied, keeping her voice even. "He's renting the room upstairs while working as foreman at the Simmons Ranch." Reverend Porter nodded slowly. "I see, and I'm sure your arrangement is entirely proper. However, appearances matter greatly in a small town, Mrs. Douglas. There has been talk." "There's always talk, Reverend. I've learned to ignore it. Perhaps. But as your spiritual advisor, I must consider your reputation, your standing in the community. A young widow living alone with an unmarried man, regardless of the circumstances, invites speculation." Nathaniel felt her cheeks flush with anger. "Mr. Rawlins has been nothing but respectful. He's helped me when the rest of this town turned its back. I won't ask him to leave because of gossip." "I'm not suggesting he leave," the Reverend said, holding up a hand. "Merely that you consider ways to formalize the arrangement, to protect both your reputations." "Formalize?" Nathaniel repeated, not understanding. "Marriage, Mrs. Douglas. It would solve the immediate problem and provide you with protection and support as you establish your new business." Nathaniel stared at him, speechless. "Reverend Porter, Mr. Rawlins and I barely know each other. Marriage is hardly—" "Many successful marriages begin with less," he interrupted gently. "Practical considerations are often as important as romantic ones, especially on the frontier. Mr. Rawlins seems a decent man, with good prospects as Simmons' foreman. You could do worse." Before Nathaniel could form a response to this extraordinary suggestion, the bell above the door jingled again. Killian walked in, stopping short when he saw the Reverend. "Reverend Porter," he said, nodding politely. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "Not at all, Mr. Rawlins," the Reverend replied, rising from his chair. "Mrs. Douglas and I were just discussing the future. Perhaps you'd like to join the conversation?" Killian glanced at Nathaniel, taking in her flushed face and tense posture. "I think I'll let Mrs. Douglas fill me in later, if she wishes," he said carefully. "I only stopped by to pick up my hat before heading back to the ranch." Reverend Porter looked between them, then sighed. "Very well. I'll leave you to your thoughts, Mrs. Douglas, but please consider what I've said, for both your sakes." With a nod to Killian, he departed. As soon as the door closed behind him, Killian turned to Nathaniel. "What was that about?" Nathaniel let out a shaky laugh. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me." "He came to suggest that we should marry, to protect our reputations." Killian's eyebrows shot up. "Marry us?" "Yes. Apparently our living arrangement is causing talk, despite your status as a paying lodger." Nathaniel shook her head. "I've never heard anything so absurd." But Killian didn't laugh as she expected. Instead, he looked thoughtful, even troubled. "Is it so absurd?" he asked quietly. Nathaniel's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" Killian paced to the window, then back again, as if gathering his thoughts. "I didn't plan to speak of this yet. It's too soon, I know that. You're still grieving Thomas, and we've known each other such a short time." He ran a hand through his hair. "But I can't deny that I've come to care for you, Nathaniel. More than I should, perhaps." Nathaniel felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. "Killian, you don't need to say anything," he said quickly. "I don't expect you to feel the same. I just wanted you to know that, at least for me, the Reverend's suggestion wasn't entirely absurd." With that, he grabbed his hat from the hook by the door and left, the bell jingling cheerfully behind him, mocking the sudden heaviness in Nathaniel's heart. She sat down hard in her chair, mind reeling. Killian had feelings for her, and if she was honest with herself, truly honest, she had feelings for him too. Feelings that had grown with each passing day, each shared meal, each quiet conversation. But Was she ready? Could she open her heart again so soon after losing Thomas? And what would people think that she had barely waited until Thomas was cold in his grave before taking up with another man? Yet, even as these doubts swirled through her mind, Nathaniel found herself remembering something Thomas had said during his final days. "Promise me you won't be alone, Nat," he had whispered, using the nickname only he ever used. "Promise me you'll find happiness again." She had made that promise, though at the time it had seemed impossible to imagine. Now, unexpectedly, a chance at happiness had appeared before her, different from what she had known with Thomas, but no less real. Nathaniel spent a restless night, tossing and turning as she weighed her feelings against her fears. By morning, she had made a decision. She would speak with Killian, tell him honestly that she had feelings for him too, but that she needed time to grieve properly, time to establish her new business, time to be sure that what they felt was real and not just born of their unusual circumstances. But when she went downstairs, expecting to find Killian at breakfast as usual, he was gone. Not just out to the ranch early, but gone. His few possessions cleared from the upstairs room, the rent for the remaining week left neatly on the table with a brief note. "Nathaniel, I've spoken with Mr. Simmons. The foreman's cabin is ready earlier than expected. I've moved there to spare you any further gossip. The work we've done together these past weeks has meant more to me than I can say. I wish you every happiness with your new venture. Yours, Killian." Nathaniel read the note 3 times, trying to understand what had happened. Had she misunderstood his words yesterday? Had he regretted speaking so openly? Or was he simply trying to protect her reputation, as the Reverend had suggested? Whatever his reasons, the message was clear. He was stepping back, giving her space. And while part of her appreciated the gesture, another part felt a surprising sense of loss. Over the next few days, Nathaniel threw herself into preparations for the bookshop. She contacted publishers in Denver and St. Louis, arranged for shelving to be built, and began transforming the front room, where the printing press had stood, into a welcoming space filled with light and the promise of books. The press itself she sold to a newspaper in a growing town 20 miles away, using part of the money to pay off the remainder of the bank loan and the rest to order her first inventory of books. People in town, perhaps feeling guilty about their previous treatment of her, went out of their way to help. Mrs. Peterson from the general store offered to display a sign announcing the coming bookshop. Mr. Turner, the carpenter, gave her a discount on the shelving. Even Sheriff Taylor stopped by to ask if she needed any assistance with moving the heavy press when the buyers came. But there was no sign of Killian. Nathaniel heard from others that he was settling in well at the Simmons Ranch, already making improvements to the operation. Twice she considered riding out there herself, but each time she lost her nerve. What would she say? How could she explain feelings she barely understood herself? A week after Killian's departure, Nathaniel was arranging the newly installed shelves when the bell above the door rang. She turned, expecting to see Mrs. Peterson, who had promised to bring by some curtain samples. Instead, Killian stood there, hat in hand, looking as nervous as she felt. "Killian," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nathaniel." He glanced around the transformed space. "The shop looks wonderful. You've done amazing work." "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. "I got your note," she said finally. Killian nodded. "I thought it best to give you space. After what I said, I was afraid I'd made you uncomfortable." "You didn't," Nathaniel replied, taking a step toward him. "I was surprised, yes, but not uncomfortable." Hope flickered in his eyes. "No? No." Nathaniel took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the Reverend's suggestion not being entirely absurd. And?" Killian's voice was soft, tentative. "And I think perhaps he wasn't entirely wrong, about there being something between us." Nathaniel twisted her hands together. "But I'm not ready for marriage, Killian. It's too soon after Thomas, too fast after meeting you. I need time." Killian's smile was gentle, understanding. "Time is something I'm happy to give, Nathaniel. I don't want to rush you or dishonor your grief for Thomas. But I don't want you to leave again either," she continued, finding courage in his acceptance. "I've missed you this past week, missed our conversations, our meals together, missed having you in my life. Killian took a step closer. "I've missed you too, more than I thought possible." They stood there, the space between them charged with unspoken emotions. Then Nathaniel did something she hadn't planned. She reached out and took his hand in hers. "Stay for dinner tonight," she said. "We can talk more, figure out where to go from here." Killian's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "I'd like that." That evening marked the beginning of a new chapter for them both. Killian didn't move back into the shop. They agreed that would indeed cause too much gossip. But he visited regularly, helping with preparations for the bookshop opening and sharing meals with Nathaniel. They took things slowly, allowing their feelings to develop naturally as they learned more about each other. Nathaniel told Killian about her childhood in Boston, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before meeting Thomas. Killian shared stories of his years on the Texas range, of the beauty and harshness of life under open skies. As spring turned to summer, the bookshop, now named the Chronicle Books in Thomas's memory, opened its doors. To Nathaniel's delight and surprise, it was an immediate success. Residents of Redemption Creek, starved for new reading material, eagerly purchased everything from penny dreadfuls to leather-bound classics. The reading room, with its comfortable chairs and welcoming atmosphere, became a gathering place for discussions and quiet contemplation. Through it all, Killian was her steadfast support, offering encouragement when she doubted herself and practical help when needed. Their relationship deepened, growing beyond initial attraction into something more solid, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. One evening in late summer, they sat together on the back porch after closing the shop, enjoying the cool evening air. Nathaniel had just finished telling Killian about a letter she'd received from Thomas's sister, expressing her gratitude for bringing Griffin to justice and her pleasure at hearing about the bookshop. "She says she wants to visit next spring," Nathaniel said, folding the letter carefully, "to see what her brother helped create." "I think she'll be proud of what you've accomplished," Killian replied, "just as Thomas would be." Nathaniel smiled, feeling the familiar pang at Thomas's name, but noticing how it had softened over the months, becoming a gentle reminder rather than a sharp pain. "I've been thinking," Killian said after a moment, his voice taking on a serious tone, "about us, about the future." Nathaniel turned to face him, heart quickening. "What about the future?" "I love you, Nathaniel," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day, when you stood in the rain at your husband's grave, refusing to let grief break you. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination to build something meaningful here." Tears pricked at Nathaniel's eyes. "Killian." "I'm not asking for marriage," he continued quickly. "Not yet. I know you're still finding your way. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Because what I feel for you isn't going to change." Nathaniel reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "It happened so gradually, I didn't even notice at first. But it's true. I love you, Killian Rawlins." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. "I never expected this," he said softly. "When I gave Griffin my last coin for information about work, I was desperate at the end of my rope. I never imagined I'd find you. And I never imagined I could feel this way again," Nathaniel replied. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. But you showed me it wasn't. You helped me find the strength to build something new." Killian lifted their entwined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "So, where do we go from here?" Nathaniel thought for a moment. "Forward," she said finally. "Together." As autumn painted the hills around Redemption Creek with gold and crimson, Nathaniel and Killian continued to build their relationship one day at a time. The town's initial gossip about them faded as people accepted their courtship as proper and respectable. Reverend Porter, perhaps feeling his earlier interference had been presumptuous, now offered only his blessing and occasional words of encouragement. Even Mrs. Simmons, the ranch owner's wife, who had initially been skeptical of her foreman courting the newspaper widow, became a supporter after seeing them together at church socials. The bookshop thrived beyond Nathaniel's wildest expectations. When a schoolteacher finally arrived in Redemption Creek that fall, Nathaniel worked with her to establish a proper lending library within the shop, allowing children from outlying farms access to books they could never afford to buy. Killian, meanwhile, transformed the Simmons Ranch into one of the most efficient operations in the county. His fair treatment of the ranch hands and innovative approaches to cattle management earned him respect throughout the region. One crisp November afternoon, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Killian arrived at the bookshop just as Nathaniel was closing for the day. "I have something to show you," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Can you come with me?" Curious, Nathaniel grabbed her coat and gloves. Killian helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, his arms encircling her waist as they rode out of town. "Where are we going?" she asked as they followed the river west. "You'll see," Killian replied, his breath warm against her ear. After about a mile, they crested a small hill overlooking a meadow. There, nestled against a stand of pines, stood a cabin, small but sturdy, with smoke curling from its chimney and windows glowing with lamplight. "Killian!" Nathaniel gasped. "What is this?" "My new home," he said, guiding the horse closer. "Or rather, it could be our home, if you want it to be." As they dismounted, Nathaniel took in the details: the carefully crafted porch, the flower boxes beneath the windows, the neat stack of firewood along one wall. "How did you do this?" she asked, amazed. "When did you have time?" "I've been working on it for months, whenever I could get away from the ranch," Killian explained, leading her up the steps. "Simmons gave me this parcel as part of my wages, said a foreman should have his own place, not live in the hands' quarters." Inside, the cabin was simple but beautiful. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a cheerful blaze already burning. A table and chairs stood in one corner, a bed frame in another. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty but clearly designed with books in mind. "It's perfect," Nathaniel whispered, turning to take it all in. "But it's so close to town, you could still live here and work at the ranch." "That's the other part of my news," Killian said, taking her hands in his. "Simmons is selling a portion of his land, the section nearest town. He's getting older, wants to scale back. He's offered to sell it to me at a fair price, with terms I can manage." Nathaniel's eyes widened. "Your own ranch?" Killian nodded, his expression both excited and nervous. "It's small just enough for a modest herd to start, but it could grow, and being so close to town means—" "Means what?" Nathaniel prompted when he hesitated. "Means you could keep the bookshop," he finished, "if you wanted to, if you decided to marry me." Nathaniel's breath caught. Even though they had spoken of marriage as a possibility, the actual proposal still took her by surprise. "Killian, are you asking—" He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Nathaniel Douglas, I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me? Make this cabin our home? Build a life with me here?" Tears spilled down Nathaniel's cheeks as joy bubbled up within her. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Killian Rawlins, I will marry you." He rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss tender yet full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathaniel laughed through her tears. "What is it?" Killian asked, smiling at her joy. "I was just thinking about that day we met," she said, "when you gave your last coin to Griffin for information that turned out to be worthless." "Not worthless," Killian corrected her. "That coin led me to you. Best investment I ever made." As snow fell softly outside the windows of what would become their home, Nathaniel and Killian held each other close, the past honored but not binding them, the future stretching before them, full of possibilities neither had dared to imagine just a few months before. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, with Reverend Porter officiating in the church decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. The entire town turned out for the celebration. The same people who had once whispered about the widow no one wanted, now cheering as Nathaniel became Mrs. Rawlins. Thomas's sister came from Ohio for the ceremony. Bringing with her family heirlooms she insisted Nathaniel should have. "Thomas would want you to be happy," she told Nathaniel the night before the wedding, "and I can see this man makes you happy." The reception was held at the bookshop, transformed for the evening with lanterns and garlands. Children ran between the bookshelves playing hide and seek, while adults danced to fiddle music in the cleared center of the room. As Killian whirled her around the floor for their first dance as husband and wife, Nathaniel felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find again. "Happy?" Killian asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "More than I can say," she replied. Later that night, they rode to their cabin through gently falling snow, the windows glowing with welcome as Killian carried Nathaniel across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rawlins," he said, setting her gently on her feet. Nathaniel looked around at the cabin, now furnished with a mixture of her things from above the shop, and new pieces Killian had crafted himself. Books already lined many of the shelves, with space left for the many more they would collect together over the years. "Home," she repeated, the word filling her with warmth. "I never thought I'd find it again after Thomas died." "I never thought I'd find love again either." Killian drew her into his arms. "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never expect," he said softly. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, covering the past and creating a clean slate for the future. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the home that would witness their life together, the arguments and reconciliations, the celebrations and sorrows, the quiet moments and passionate ones. In the years that followed, the small ranch prospered under Killian's careful management, gradually expanding as they acquired neighboring parcels. The bookshop remained Nathaniel's domain, evolving into a cultural center for the growing town of Redemption Creek. Children came first, a son they named Thomas Killian in honor of the past and present, then twin daughters who inherited their mother's strength and their father's love of open spaces. The cabin expanded too, with rooms added as the family grew, but always with the original structure at its heart. On warm summer evenings, Nathaniel would often sit on the porch, watching Killian teach their children to ride or mend fences, marveling at how life could change so completely in such a short time. From grief to joy, from loneliness to family, from a widow no one wanted to a woman surrounded by love. And sometimes, when the children were asleep and the night was quiet, Killian would join her there, taking her hand as they watched the stars wheel overhead. "Any regrets?" he would ask, and Nathaniel would smile, squeezing his hand. "Not one," she would reply. "Not a single one." For the struggling cowboy who had given his last coin had found something far more valuable than any information Griffin could have provided. He had found Nathaniel. And she had found in him the love she never expected, a love that would carry them through all the seasons of their lives together.